Welcome, everyone, to the Wsbc webinar, The Business Case for Water Stewardship. I'm Greg Gasper, the Program Manager for Sustainability Services and Water Stewardship for WMEP and Wsbc, and happy to be your moderator for today's session. Next slide, please. We have three great speakers today that are really going to, I believe, enlighten you on some of the water stewardship concepts from a conceptual standpoint as well as a practical application. We have Jennifer Arnold, who is a senior consultant and AWS specialist for WMEP, as well as Peg Dorn, who is also the same title, senior consultant and AWS specialist for WMEP. We also have Krista Kainanen, the corporate environmental engineer for Green Bay Packaging, to talk about their experiences with water stewardship and the business case. So, next slide. WSBC, for those of you who are new to understanding what WSBC is, it's an organization and its mission is to advance sustainable principles and practice forward through the power of business. And it does that through many of these different programs that you see here in the lower part of the slide, from the Green Masters program to Cool Choices, 21st Century Pathways, the Sustainability Consortium, as well as the Alliance for Water Stewardship. Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council members, there's many different levels of membership. As a business, there could be individual memberships and as well as an affiliate membership. So I encourage you to go to the WSBC website to find out more information, if you're not a member, of the options you have for potential membership in this great organization. Next. WSBC has some upcoming events, as you can see here in the top portion of this screen. One of the things I do want to make a highlight, though, to all of those who are attending today is the WSBC annual conference is going to be held in Pewaukee, Wisconsin on December 15th. So again, if you go to wisconsinsustainability.com to look at the website, you'll see more information about those upcoming WSBC events, as well as the annual conference. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Arnold, who's going to get us started on today's webinar, looking at an overview of water stewardship.
All right, thanks, Greg. We're going to start with a definition of water stewardship. And as you look at the screen here, there's a couple words that are bolded. I'll start with the stakeholder inclusive process. Stakeholder meaning any organization, group, or individual that has some interest or stake in the implementing organization's activities, and that can affect or be affected by them. And so we want for water stewardship, we want it to be a stakeholder inclusive process. And as we have all of our inputs, then in the end, we want to have watershed-based actions. And another name for watershed in this case would be catchment. So why water stewardship? It could be many different reasons. Could be organizations are experiencing or may experience business interruption and cost pressures from any of these items here, whether it's mandatory conservation measures, excuse me, something going on with regulatory, maybe it's community scrutiny, maybe it's some adverse weather events that you want to become more resilient against, or perhaps market risk and pressures. So these are the main visuals for the AWS standard. And so when I look at the circle, it reminds me of the plan, do, check, act cycle. And this standard is really intended to encourage continual improvement, similar to many other standards, and really does not need to be implemented beginning at step 1 and going sequential, proceeding through step 5. You should implement it as suitable for your organization, and it might require you to adapt. It might require you to, non-sequential use of the steps and the criteria, but think of it as that plan, do, check, act cycle on a path of continual improvement. And so as we look at these steps here, you can see step 1, gather and understand. We're really trying to look at the data and identify what's going on. And as we move to step 2, we're getting a commitment and starting to plan towards a water stewardship plan. Then once we have that plan, we need to implement. So the do part of the plan, do, check, act cycle. And once we have some time that has passed and have implemented our plan, we need to see how we're doing. What is our performance against that plan? We need to evaluate and finally communicate and disclose your site's stewardship efforts. So the other part of this visual here is if you implement the standard, it's intended to achieve these 5 main outcomes that are shown here for your site in its defined physical scope, whether it's good water governance, sustainable water balance, that good water quality standard status, important water related areas, or safe water sanitation, hygiene for all, or WASH. Okay, the slide is not advancing. So I'm going to try to stop sharing and see if that helps.
Jen, I can take over if you need me to drive the slides as well.
Yeah, all of a sudden my computer locked up.
Okay.
So that is never a good sign.
I will share my screen.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Okay, so you can move ahead to the next slide. All right, so we're looking at some relationships of some terminology. So first we have scarcity and stress. So scarcity is the lack of sufficient available water resources to meet the demands of water usage within a region for environmental and human needs. So that could be physical or it could be economic. And in terms of the economic, it's when there's insufficient supply to humans when water is naturally abundant. It could be underinvestment in the water supply infrastructure as a reason why that might be. So as you click ahead, Greg, scarcity is directly linked with availability. On the other side, then we have stress, and that's connected, if you can click ahead, to not only availability, but then the quality and the accessibility. And so a little bit more about the water quality. It's in terms of the quality of a natural water body in terms of physical, chemical, and biological parameters. So those relevant quality standards are defined by national or local regulation and guidelines. And good water quality is where it meets the requirements of native flora and fauna, and for human needs where applicable, but the status is not required to be pristine, contaminant-free, or of good drinking water quality. It's really measured against that native flora and fauna. And so you look at all of these things as your inputs, and then you have those discussions around what Greg can click on to next is what are our risks? And based on that dialogue, decide what actions do you want to take to address that risk. You can go ahead and click. So this is a good visual of how all this ties together. So I'll go with the picture first. You have circles around several different entities, whether they're businesses, a farm, homes in a neighborhood, and shows how they're all tied together. You can see all the different sources of water, from rainfall to overland flow to filtration and groundwater and the river itself. But ultimately, all these are tied together into that same watershed or catchment. So we want to engage with those stakeholders through investigating water stewardship in this standard and understand the impacts on that outgoing catchment through those 5 outcomes that were just shown on the last slide. And then if you desire, you could pursue a third-party verification. You can advance. So now I'll talk a little bit about the process standard. It includes steps, which we saw in that circle diagram. And then from there, you have criteria, and that tells you what you have to do. And then from there, it breaks it down to indicators, and that is the evidence that you've done the items that were listed in the criteria. So as you move on to step one, where we're understanding and gathering data, we need to do it both from a site perspective and a catchment perspective. So from a site perspective, the site for the AWS standard is the physical area over which the implementing organization owns or manages land and carries out its principal activities. And then from a catchment perspective, that's that geographical zone in which water is captured, flows through, and eventually discharges at one or more points. So in that step one, we need to understand it from both the site and the catchment. And then as we move on, we're talking about inputs and outputs. Where do you source your water? Where does your discharge go? And so those are items to consider. We also need to consider our infrastructure. So the infrastructure includes all man-made equipment, an infrastructure for all those inputs, the abstraction, delivery, storage, treatment, provision of your water supply, and then for the output, for the collection, treatment, and discharge of your wastewater. Another item to pay attention to is indirect water usage, and that is the water that is typically embedded into all your products and services. And then we move on to shared challenges. So, remind you of the red circles in the last slide of how everybody's kind of tied together. And so the shared water challenge is a water-related issue, concern, or threat shared by the site and one or more of those stakeholders within the catchment. So perhaps maybe there's something shared between the neighborhood and the farm, like we had in that last picture. And then from there, like the other visual showed, it leads into risk, all those inputs, and you prioritize what opportunities or challenges that you want to pursue. And then the last bullet point points out that this standard does work well with other standards, such as the environmental ISO 14001, LEED, and others. So go ahead, Greg. So then on the action plan side of things, or that output, the main thing you have is that site water stewardship plan. So using all those inputs, you put together a plan to achieve the goals towards addressing what you discovered as your challenges, your risk, and your opportunities. Think about the targets from a SMART perspective: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. As the definition said, for water stewardship, we want to be stakeholder inclusive. So we want to keep them in the loop, keep them informed. We want there to be communication and disclosure. So for example, to disclose water-related internal governance of the site's management, to communicate the water stewardship plan with your relevant stakeholders, to disclose your annual site water stewardship summary, to disclose your efforts to collectively address shared water challenges, and finally, to communicate transparency in water-related compliance. And then throughout, to keep engagement with the stakeholders and to align your actions at your facility that address the conditions in the catchment. You can go ahead. And just to speak a little bit more, the goal is to have that stakeholder engagement. And ideally, everyone finds its value added, should drive innovation, drive efficiencies, increase the local knowledge. Maybe it helps you in employee recruitment or employee retention. Hopefully people see that value added side, but then there's also the the cost side of things. And if you have good stakeholder engagement, perhaps you can avoid some of these costs, mandated regulatory compliance. Maybe you can vet internal initiatives for red flags, or perhaps if there are conflicts, you could reduce the intensity of those conflicts. And just an example of cost of stakeholder activism or not being engaged, there's an example of the Pebble Mine in Alaska, where Anglo American had put $541 million into the project before it announced that it was abandoning it. So that's an example where it went drastically wrong. So the goal is to engage with your stakeholders and strive towards the value added side of things. And with that, I believe I'm going to turn it over to Peg.
Okay, thank you, Jen. What we're going to talk about next is the business case for water stewardship. Being a good water steward doesn't make sense from a social standpoint and from a moral standpoint, but it also makes sense from a business standpoint. And we're going to go over how it does make sense. So this first slide here is a survey done by the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum is basically, it engages business, political, and cultural leaders to shape the global, regional, and industry agendas. So each year they do a survey of what the biggest risks are to the business. So this one is from 2020. And if you look at number 5 there, water crisis was brought up as the number 5 concern to businesses worldwide. That's pretty high. So it is an issue. And if you look down, I don't know if you can see number 10, but number 10 is infectious diseases. And considering what the world has been going through the last year and a half, it has shot to number 1 in 2021. But a water crisis is still a significant risk as identified by business leaders. Next slide, please. So what are we concerned about? Some of this I'm going to review what Jen has already covered. The quantity of water. We want to make sure that we have enough water to suit our needs. I'm sitting in Madison, Wisconsin right now, really close to Lake Michigan. We have plenty of water. We don't have a quantity issue, but we may have a quality issue. You want your water supply to have a high enough quality to meet your needs. Source water health. You want to maintain that source of water, keep it healthy, and keep enough water for your needs and the stakeholders' needs. And then there's community perception. No one wants, or no business wants to be associated with a major spill or an adverse environmental impact. So Greg, if you want to go. Thank you. So what are the risks? We have physical risks. Physical risks include quantity and quality, essentially. Not having enough water, not being able to provide water that's of suitable quality to your facility. And there's reputational risk. This is a risk to your brand. Like I said, you do not want to be associated with a spill or any adverse environmental impact. There's regulatory risks. This could be fines. Significant fines are levied when we have spills and when we have regulatory issues. No business wants to be involved with that. And by preparing and putting together a plan, you are hopefully, if you do it right, avoiding those regulatory risks. You're being proactive instead of being reactive. That's an important part of avoiding these financial costs. And the next one is financial risks. This could be pretty significant if you have a spill to clean up. It can be pretty expensive to clean that up. It can be pretty expensive to do fines. So there's a financial risk of not being a good water steward. Okay, next slide, please. So there are some tools out there to help you get started and help you develop your plan. This first one is Ecolab's Water Risk Monetizer. There is a link there at the bottom of the slide that'll take you to the monetizer. It's free of charge and it's available to the public. So you can go out there, you just have to log in and you can start entering data. And basically what the monetizer does is it helps you identify risks based on your facility and based on your catchment information. So you enter the information into the monetizer. It will quantify what your risks are, and it'll help, and it'll put it in financial terms. So again, we're making the business case for being a good water steward. And to do that, this tool will help you put it into financial terms. It will also calculate your return on investment for water management strategies. So you're showing graphically how being a good water steward will help you, give you a return on investment. Again, we're going into that proactive, not reactive stage. So the risks, incoming water, you're going to look at what risk could you possibly have with incoming water? Is there enough water? Does it have a high enough quality? Is the source healthy? They're also going to look at outgoing water. I come from the food side of the industry where we have wastewater, cheese plants in Wisconsin. A lot of them, most of them, have their own water treatment facilities right on site. So they are very concerned about their outgoing water supply. So the monetizer can help you put some figures to that. And then it, like I said, revenue, it's going to calculate your return on investment. So that's a calculator. And there's a take action tab at the top of the screen when you go into the risk monetizer. And essentially, take action. You're going to establish your water management plan. You're going to assess and monetize your business risks, which could be very unique to you. Not everyone faces the same risks. You prioritize actions and you set targets. And Jen covered SMART targets. You want to make sure they're achievable, they make sense, and they're measurable. And then you're going to identify opportunities to mitigate those risks that you've identified. And essentially that's going to become your water plan. And then you execute your water plan. And then, like Jen said, plan, do, check, act. Once you execute the plan, you come back, you check to see if it's working. And if it's not, or if there are areas that need improvement, you act on those areas. So this Ecolab Risk Monetizer is a very powerful tool to help you create that plan and put some dollar signs to it. Okay, next slide, please. So there's also WRI's Aqueduct. WRI is the World Resource Institute, say that 3 times fast. And they have tasked themselves with identifying and evaluating water risks around the world. So in the US, we're pretty lucky with, we have pretty good systems. But when you think about other countries and their challenges, it gets to be, you take a different perspective when you start thinking about that. So what the aqueduct does, it will take the current state, the current situation of water throughout the world, essentially. You can drill down to your catchment, you can go bigger to your country, you can look at the world state, and that's a current state. And then it will, through magical algorithms, give you a future state of what things are going to look like in a few years. And again, another powerful tool. So they have actually 4 tools out there. We've got the Water Risk Atlas, which covers water-related risks. It assesses your exposure to those risks across multiple locations. So you can play with this aqueduct tool. You can put in more than one location. There's the aqueduct food tool. This will cover the risks associated with food security. What are the risks to agriculture? There's the aqueduct flood, which covers flood risks and what those impacts would be. And then there's the country profile and ranking. This is a high-level summary. It covers multiple countries, and it's basically summary statistics for water risks at a national level. So if you go out and take a look at that, play with it, it's a great tool. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you, Greg. This is a good slide as kind of a call to action. This came from WRI's Aqueduct Risk Atlas. And if you look on the left is our baseline. This is water stress in the United States. So this is current state on the left. Obviously, the more red you have, the more stress you have. And then if you look on the right side, that is what it is calculated out for our future state in 2030, which isn't that far away. And you look at the amount of water stress there versus current state, and it's pretty significant. So we're kind of using this as a call to action to have businesses start thinking about water stewardship, start putting together plans and implementing those plans. So with that, I am going to throw it over to Krista.
Thank you. I am going to switch in my presentation. So please, someone confirm if you're seeing what I think you're seeing. Can anyone confirm that you're seeing this?
Yep, I see your slides, Krista.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you today. My name is Krista Kainanen. I am part of Green Bay Packaging's corporate environmental team. I've been a part of the team for about 6 years now. For those of you not familiar, Green Bay Packaging is a family-owned company fully integrated in producing corrugated boxes. So essentially what that means is that Green Bay Packaging owns forest lands that supply fiber to our Arkansas Craft Mill for making the paper that goes into boxes, known in the industry as corrugated containers. In addition to the virgin fiber mill in Arkansas, GBP operates a 100% recycled fiber mill in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which reclaims old corrugated containers and scrap to produce new paper for box making. The paper from those two mills supply Green Bay Packaging's 22 converting plants. We also operate a handful of coated products facilities, a lumber mill, a folding carton division, and an in-store innovation retail sales group. GBP's 37 production facilities operate in 15 states throughout the US and one in Mexico, so we have a relatively broad service area. And as exciting as Green Bay Packaging's operations are, we're here today to talk about sustainability and specifically Green Bay Packaging's water sustainability journey. So I'll share a little bit about where the program started and how it's evolved, and then talk about where we are today, and finally look ahead to where I see us going. As I'm sure many of you can appreciate, data is the foundation of any water management program. At pretty much every water-related event I attend, I hear the phrase, you can't manage what you don't measure, and it's true. So at Green Bay Packaging, water is metered and monitored at manufacturing facilities, and then data is collected through annual corporate surveys. And that information is used to analyze performance by site and product group. And then we share the results through annual site-specific sustainability reports to empower decision-making at the facility level. We started collecting basic water data from manufacturing facilities in 2007, and we've expanded our scope over the years as we've sought to manage additional water-related considerations. One big expansion occurred in 2017 when GBP received its first customer request for CDP disclosure. For those of you unfamiliar with CDP, it's a nonprofit global disclosure platform focused on the business impacts of climate change, water stress, and deforestation. In 2017, in preparation for disclosure, GBP completed our first company-wide water security assessment. The initial evaluation included assessing data quality, identifying and mapping impacted water basins, and initiating a multi-year assessment of the financial and operational risks related to water and wastewater. Each of these is now done annually, and we've improved our evaluation each year, better positioning us to get ahead of water-related risks and identify opportunities. One of the ways we were able to improve our understanding of reliance on water was through development of a water mapping tool for our converting facilities. The facility level water mapping improves our site-specific understanding of water use and facilitates like process comparisons to help us identify best practices. It also allows us to validate or correct assumptions about water use, resulting in improved data quality, and allows us to quantify the benefits of specific water-related initiatives and changes. So while converting operations represent a smaller portion of total company water use, they were the easiest process to map and could be reproduced across multiple sites, which is why we started there. While our mills have a much bigger impact, they're also much more complex to map, and efforts are not necessarily reproducible across multiple sites. And finally, employee training was maybe the most important component of this phase of our program. Unless everyone understands how and why things are changing and what their role is, the program would never gain traction. Buy-in at all levels is vital for real change. Since 2017, we've invested in training our site environmental coordinators about water management and developing tools to assist our coordinators to train plant personnel. And we've made sure to focus on practical information in the training, what and how, but also incorporating why it matters, why they should care, and how they as individuals can have a real impact. So this map looks pretty similar to the one Peg shared. This is Green Bay Packaging's WRI Aqueduct tool, a water security map for 2020. Since 2017, our water sustainability program has increasingly focused on water security as we seek to manage risk and realize opportunities. We've identified how we impact the watersheds in which we operate, and we're engaging with stakeholders within and beyond our company to ensure long-term viability of those resources. And I want to be transparent here and acknowledge that this approach does present some challenges. One of my biggest challenges, and maybe some of you can relate, has been getting buy-in from decision makers at all levels. The benefit of the water security approach is that it's grounded in business considerations, risk and opportunity. But in many companies, ours included, business decisions and sustainability decisions are not necessarily made by the same groups. So we have to engage across multiple disciplines to achieve our mutual goals. And the first big challenge here can be just getting in the room, getting an audience with decision makers. And you see this concern reflected in water sustainability reporting. Disclosure platforms want to know at what level business decision makers are engaging with water issues. And I see this as a double-sided problem. So on one hand, you need business decision makers who appreciate the value of the natural world and its potential impact on the company's financial well-being. But in order to get there, you need sustainability professionals who can clearly communicate the value of the natural world. And this is where I see the other big challenge, and one where we as sustainability professionals really have an opportunity to step up our game. We need to be able to communicate the risks and opportunities around resource management in a way that business decision makers can understand and connect to their day-to-day considerations and obligations. We needed to be able to distill technical information into actionable recommendations, but we also need to be able to communicate that information in a way that captures the attention of decision makers by bringing a bit of art into our science. And this isn't a skill that many environmental and sustainability professionals are necessarily equipped with as part of our technical education. And for some of us, maybe isn't something we think should really matter. We tend to be pragmatic and data driven by nature, but not everyone functions that way. And if we want to get the buy-in we need from decision makers, we need to be able to meet them where they're at. But if we can do that, if we can invest in that kind of engagement, this approach can have far-reaching benefits, facilitating truly sustainable business growth. As we pursue water security at Green Bay Packaging, we have a few initiatives underway to take our program to the next level. We've done company-wide and high-level site risk evaluations for all of our manufacturing facilities and determined that only 2, our paper mills, have the potential to significantly impact the company from a water risk perspective, specifically when it comes to things we can predict and control. These 2 facilities account for 98% of company-wide water intake and discharge and 90% of our water reuse, and are the only Green Bay Packaging facilities discharging directly to surface. So we're taking the next step to really dig into that potential by implementing site-specific water mapping and risk assessments for those 2 facilities to more fully understand the role of water in their operations and the potential impact of those facilities on local basins. We're also working to implement best practices and site-specific improvement initiatives at our converting facilities as opportunities are identified. Our water mapping initiative for converting facilities has been really successful in revealing what types of practices impact water performance for a converting facility. And at this point, I can usually look at an operation's annual water data, intake, discharge, and consumption, and have a pretty good idea of whether they're implementing best practices or which ones to recommend to help them improve. And finally, Green Bay Packaging is constantly reinvesting in our manufacturing facilities. In just the past couple of years, we've completed or are working on at least 10 facility expansions and building projects. And that's out of about 35 facilities. So it's a pretty significant portion. Our sustainability team is working with operations, engineering, and business managers to incorporate water considerations such as metering and reuse into building and expansion projects as opportunities arise. And as we work to better understand and manage our water program, we've recognized that water reuse is foundational to our water security. And we anticipate continuing our tradition as an industry leader in innovation around reuse opportunities. Innovation in water use has been a hallmark of our company and a fundamental value for many years. And this emphasis on industry-leading water performance was evident in development of a first of its kind closed-loop process water system at the Green Bay Mill back in 1992. Since then, multiple divisions have implemented cutting-edge water use technology initiatives, for which Green Bay Packaging has been recognized with several awards over the years. Currently, 89% of water withdrawn by Green Bay Packaging is reused prior to discharge. Over half of our box plants have implemented reuse practices, saving approximately 3 million gallons a year. And 99% of fresh water withdrawn at our Arkansas Craft Mill is reused at least once prior to discharge. Finally, the Green Bay Mill, Green Bay Packaging's landmark innovation in water use technology. As many of you may know, we recently completed construction of the first new paper mill in Wisconsin in over 30 years. And in an exciting partnership with the nearby POTW, the new mill is reclaiming treated municipal wastewater as the primary source of processed water for the entire facility. As you can see in the lower image, I'll just point it out here. Here in the lower image, the proximity to the POTW made the partnership possible. Here is the Green Bay Mill, and here is the POTW. So literally very close. But Green Bay Packaging really had a vision for the project and really drove the initiative. To make it happen, we invested in the infrastructure to transport water from the POTW and installed on-site ultrafiltration and RO treatment to bring the reclaimed water up to potable quality prior to use. Like the old mill, the new mill will also extensively reuse water on site. Each gallon of fresh water brought into the facility will be reused approximately 40 times before being treated in the on-site anaerobic wastewater treatment system. Most of the treated wastewater will then be recirculated back into the mill, and a portion of it will be discharged to the POTW as part of the Circular Water Partnership. Well, you can't make paper without some water. This facility is extensively using alternative water sources to achieve a net zero impact on local water resources. As part of this project, it was also important to Green Bay Packaging to achieve zero direct discharge to the Fox River. And in order to do that, we partnered with the county and city to build a regional stormwater retention pond that will receive runoff from several municipal and industrial areas and result in more than 80% reduction in suspended solids in effluent to the river from stormwater in that area, which will improve water quality beyond our own borders and really benefit other stakeholders in the basin as well. So the Green Bay Mill has been GBP's crown jewel when it comes to sustainability, garnering several awards in recognition of its impact as a recycled fiber, recycled water mill. And we honestly expect that to continue to gain traction as the new facility ramps up production and we can quantify the resulting impacts to the local water system. As I look ahead to the future of water sustainability at Green Bay Packaging, there are a few trends I expect to stick and define the next few years, and I wanted to take a moment to share that with this group. First, water is and will continue to be approached as a contextual issue, with increasing pressure to evaluate and understand how facility level water use impacts operational performance and other users in the watersheds in which we operate. To that end, I think you'll see an increasing emphasis on thinking big and acting small when it comes to water initiatives, with big picture, long-term thinking and targeted basin-specific action and initiatives. I also anticipate water use impacts to increasingly be treated as a business decision with lots of risk to avoid, but also potentially lots of opportunity to galvanize or create market value related to water use. As a packaging company, we see this already from some of our biggest customers as they attempt to partner with or leverage their value chain to position their products as more water friendly than their competitors. Regarding risk, as Peg pointed out, the World Economic Forum has identified water insecurity as one of the top economic threats throughout the world. Regions of the US are already experiencing higher water demand than can be sustained by current resources. We see this in the current water shortage on the Colorado River. Lake Mead is at 40% capacity, and it's really challenging water users in that area. Closer to home and more immediately impactful for many of us, we've experienced and are seeing in development increasingly stringent discharge limits, as well as higher costs related to wastewater treatment. A study underway by public, private, and academic leaders in Wisconsin has identified water quality as one of the biggest challenges facing the state over the next 50 years. And in a recent survey of Green Bay packaging facilities, 30% of our respondents identified sewer-related costs as the top water-related concern for their facility. As many regions experience water supply and quality challenges, we anticipate that water reuse and reclamation will be increasingly common. In 2018, when we were first investigating the potential for reclaiming wastewater at the mill and figuring out, what steps would be required to make that possible, 14 states in the US had sanctioned regulations for reclaiming treated industrial or municipal wastewater. And some states have already begun investing in the infrastructure to sell treated wastewater as a utility. Wisconsin is not one of those states yet, but I expect that using treated municipal wastewater in industrial facilities will become increasingly common over the next few years, which is one reason Green Bay Packaging has incorporated water circularity through reuse and reclamation as one of our core water security strategies. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that have come up. Otherwise, I can turn it back over. Feel free to jot down my contact information if you want to discuss any of this farther.
Krista, we did have a question, and it was around the or the risk assessment process that you went through. Was that done internally with in-house personnel, or did you get that completed using a third party?
I did it. So I used a few tools and do each year. So actually the tools that your team pointed out as part of their presentation, WRI Aqueduct tool and the Ecolab Risk Monetizer. Those are two tools that we rely on. Also, because this came up for our company as part of CDP disclosure, I've kind of developed our own internal methods of evaluating risk based on CDP disclosure and that framework, kind of using that framework to guide our internal risk assessment processes, but also relying on WRI and Ecolab tools.
Okay. Thank you. For the general attendees, are there any questions that you have that you'd like to ask either Krista, Peg, or Jennifer? If so, if you want to type them in the chat or shout them out, we'd be happy to take them. Right now, Krista, I have one other question for you. Many companies, such as probably organizations that are also on the call today, are having a hard time finding employee resources, finding people to come work for them. How are you leveraging, or are you leveraging your water initiatives in your employment activities and efforts of trying to bring people into Green Bay Packaging?
I don't know that we're specifically using water to leverage for employee retention, but certainly, kind of holistically as an environmentally friendly or sustainable company, it's something that we value and I think leverage across the board, whether it's in, sales. We definitely do it in sales, positioning or leveraging our sustainability initiatives. But also, yeah, I think, we've kind of built a reputation as a sustainable company, as a company that invests in sustainability. And I think for people that value that, it would be a pretty easy road to figure out whether or not Green Bay Packaging is living that out. And I think we are.
Great, thank you. I don't see any questions up. I've got a couple more questions. One for you, Peg. Can you give me an example of what some of the water related costs to a business might be? You're muted. No problem.
Thank you. Yeah, water costs. Obviously, you have costs from water procurement and water treatment. Those are costs you think about. There are hidden costs like costs that like cleaning uniforms or things like that, if you have others doing that for you. And there's water related, regulatory related. If you end up having fines, or if your infrastructure is old and you have to replace pipes, that's a cost. I mean, if you have lead pipes, they're going to have to be replaced. So that's another cost. So there's hidden costs and there's obvious costs. So there's a lot of them out there.
Okay, thank you. Krista, we have another question from the chat area. It's, how do you work with the rest of the Green Bay Packaging sustainability team?
Yeah, so our sustainability team functions kind of in dual roles. So we have subject matter experts. So we have, air, water, waste, chemical subject matter experts. And then we also are kind of assigned a handful of divisions that we support and oversee. And so, my role is the water subject matter expert, water, wastewater, and stormwater. We have others who kind of focus on air, greenhouse gas. We kind of do environmental compliance and associated sustainability kind of run hand in hand for us. And so each subject matter expert oversees both compliance and sustainability initiatives. But then also we have to be, our director calls it a general contractor, kind of having some familiarity with all environmental programs so that we can support our divisions and kind of work on a division specific basis as well.
Super, thank you. Jen, I have a question since I don't see any in the chat area, is how do you start down the path of being stakeholder inclusive?
All right, so first of all, it's to identify. And so you need to identify those stakeholders. And sometimes people use a formal tool called Stakeholder Analysis to do that. It's a quadrant where on the x-axis is the interest of the stakeholder versus on the y-axis is the influence or power of the stakeholder. And as you identify people, you put them in the different quadrants, and really the quadrant to focus on first would be that high interest, that high influence. Those are your key players, and really to start there and understand and build that relationship. They probably will let you know who else you should be talking to if you're struggling to figure out who that should be. And, you know, through those conversations, you start understanding their water related challenges and understand the degree of engagement that you need or want with them. So it's really a good starting point. The standard itself is, first of all, just identify. And by going down that path with a little bit more formal tool and focusing on that high quadrant is a really good starting point.
And I'm going to stay with you, Jen. I have one other question that Krista brought up. She said, you know, one of the challenges in their organization was getting that buy-in of the decision makers, that, you know, this is something that, you know, we need to be taking a look at because it does have a potential risk to the business. How does the standard incorporate leadership or a management role in developing that water stewardship plan?
Yeah, so in step 2, the first word of that step is commit. So it's commit and plan. And the first criteria, the first thing that they're looking for us to do is to commit to water stewardship by having the senior most manager in charge of water at the site, or if necessary, a suitable individual within that organization to sign and publicly disclose a commitment to water stewardship. And specifically, if you're going down the standard, to the implementation of the AWS standard and achieving those 5 outcomes that I showed on that slide next to the circle. And finally, the allocation of the required resources to get that done.
Okay, good. Thank you, Jen. I'm going to turn it back to Krista again. Because you did mention in your presentation about getting that buy-in. Can you give us an example of a project that needed some buy-in that you maybe didn't have it at first, but through whatever tools and resources you implemented, you were able to build that case? Can you walk us through an example?
Sure. So I'll give a specific example, but this applies to several facilities for us. Our converting facilities. We've recommended since developing that each facility maps their water use. We've created a tool, we've suggested it. We really didn't start getting buy-in on the tool. It's still, I mean, hit or miss. We don't require facilities to do it, but we strongly recommend it. And just today we were doing an audit of a facility, and we were talking about their environmental performance, their sustainability performance in water use. And in 2016 and 2017, they were the highest water user of all of our box plants. In 2017 and 2018, they used that facility water mapping tool and reduced their water use at that facility. After going through that process, they installed metering to help them map their water use. They identified where, they had insufficient metering. They couldn't, track where water was going within the facility. So they added some metering, and they were able to identify that it was their converting, their printing area that was their highest water user. So they started policing water use in that area, making sure, cleanup hoses were turned off and things like that. And since 2016, they've reduced their water use at that facility by 50%. Just by policing water hoses. And so there's still, this particular facility is a little bit above average in their water use compared to some of our other plants. So, then we're taking the next step. And so we talked about it today, said, great job, you've reduced your water use significantly. You're no longer the worst performer. but you're still above average. And here are some things you can do. In that case, it was, they're still relying on informal training and policing of water use, running hoses. So we suggested put triggers on your hoses so that you can't run them. They have a trigger hose on them. And then also do some formal training. That the problem is your printing area. Here's a tool that you can use, 1-page handout to train those individuals on, best practices and why it's important. So kind of an example of how that process can go. It was when they saw their use, in a graph compared to all of our other facilities that they finally went, oh gosh, we don't want to be the worst. That looks terrible. And so they started implementing some of the tools we offered.
Neat. Another question, since you have been talking that came up, was also, what facility mapping tool did you find most useful?
So when I say facility mapping, it's one that we actually just developed. So it's an Excel-based tool that just helps our converting. It's tailored to converting facilities. So a lot of our facilities, it doesn't make sense for, but we have 22 converting facilities. So for over half of our facilities, even though they're smaller users, we can have them map their water use using this tool. So it was internally developed. And that was, I guess, for other people trying to implement something similar, if you have like facilities and you can, we worked with 2 or 3 facilities to develop the tool to make sure it was broad enough that other people could use it, but also captured the considerations for those facilities. And then, once we kind of worked through those pilot facilities, we kind of finalized the tool so it could be rolled out to others. So that it's an internally developed tool.
Okay. Thanks, Krista. And Krista, you, Peg, Jen, thank you all for your participation today in today's webinar. We're running up against the clock here and stuff, so I wanted to take time to thank you for giving your thoughts and insight on water stewardship from a practical application as well as from a theoretical standpoint. And for those of you who are interested in that theoretical standpoint and learning more about the standard that Jennifer and Peg were talking about, there's a couple of trainings being conducted by the Alliance for Water Stewardship, still scheduled for 2020. The first is September 28th through 30th, and the last one of 2021 is December 7th through 9th, and they're all online. And if you go to a4ws.org or the WSBC website, you'll be able to find a link to that, to those training session logins and where you might be interested in signing up. So I'd like to thank all of the participants, and as well as for you for joining us today for this webinar, and look forward to seeing you at subsequent WSBC webinars. And if there's anything that we could help you with, we'd certainly like to. So please feel free to reach out to Krista, Peg, Jennifer, or myself, and we're more than happy to help you answer questions outside of this webinar. So thank you.